Because this country belongs to all of us, not just to people who look one way, worship one way, or even think one way.
No one has a greater stake in a peaceful world than its most powerful nation.
In America, we don't worship government, we worship God.
Anti-Semitism is on the rise in America.
Now a spate of troubling anti-Semitic incidents over the last few weeks.
Rising number of anti-Semitic attacks across the country.
Anti-Semitic attitudes have increased in the last couple years.
Hate crimes are up in most major cities, with Jews suffering the highest percentage of any group.
2016, more than 1 in 5 hate crimes were prompted by religious bias. Out of those 1,538 offenses, more than half were anti-Jewish.
In Chicago, surveillance video shows a man vandalizing a synagogue. In Houston, a swastika was drawn in bright-colored chalk on the base of the founder statue at Rice University. In the last few weeks, dozens of Jewish community centers across the country have faced bomb threats.
Jewish centers in New York, Oregon, and Massachusetts vandalized. Arson at a synagogue in Nevada. And just this month, swastikas found in Northern Virginia.
Jews will not replace us!
11 people were just slaughtered in a synagogue in America. Investigators say Robert Bowers wanted all Jews to die.
What is the biggest problem with the Jews?
They control the federal government, they control the mass media, they control the Federal Reserve Bank. And with those powers, that are committing genocide against the white race.
4 or 5 shots have been fired into the front door. There's a male with a shotgun.
Your country has been taken from you by the synagogue of Satan.
The flags, why the shirt, why these hateful symbols in this town?
I don't think they're hateful. I think it's an ideology that has been completely misinterpreted.
We can't support Jews here. You know, you Jews come in. We got a Jew temple right up the street. Why don't you guys go up there?
And Farrakhan, by God's grace, has pulled the cover off of that satanic Jew.
Have you ever experienced any anti-Semitism?
Have you ever experienced anti-Semitism?
Have you ever experienced anti-Semitism?
I think that sometimes I've experienced anti-Semitism directly, when people realize I'm Jewish. And sometimes I've experienced it directly when people think they're talking to someone who isn't Jewish.
I think that personally I've experienced it, and I don't really know many Jews that haven't experienced it. And I think a really big part of the issue is that Jews are just kind of expected to brush it off, and it's not supposed to be this big deal. But I think that if we continue to just brush it off and act like it's not a problem, then it makes it okay for people to continue to do it. And I think that's where it started.
Throughout high school, I was called names.
The first times I realized that there was a lot of anti-Semitism around was when a good friend of mine came over to my house, probably around 9th grade, and he went to Catholic school and I went to public school, and he said, as we were playing ping pong back and forth, "Hey Cliff, what do you people like to be called?" And he went down a list of racial slurs against Jews that I was amazed at how many there were, because I had never heard all of them. And he said, "My priest says that you like to be called kikes. Is that right?"
I remember one time in sophomore year of high school, I got called into the principal's office. I was suspended for something that had happened between 2 people, and I'd witnessed it. And I remember my principal calling me into her office and telling me, asking me what happened. And after I explained my side of the story, she didn't really hear me out, didn't really listen to me, just completely dismissed me. And then she started to explain that me being a bystander to something that happened in my high school was the equivalent to Nazis in Nazi Germany that were killing the Jews. And I was shocked that someone had the audacity to say that to me when knowing that I'm Jewish. And I just looked at her and I said, like, you know I'm a Jew, right? And she said, that's beside the point.
I've been called every name in the book. I've had pennies thrown at me, and I think a lot of personal attacks on me have been, you know, the softball insult is to attack me for my religion. And so, I mean, I've had people that want to physically harm me, and an easy thing to say to me is, I want your dirty kike blood on my hands.
When I was probably a junior or senior, someone threw a penny at me and said, pick it up, dirty Jew. And so I did. And the story didn't have a happy ending for them because I made them swallow the penny. The week that we moved in, the road sign right at the end of the street was painted with a swastika. And that was an area that was rural at the time, and weren't a lot of houses around, so it was most clearly directed at us.
I think that was the point where I realized that anti-Semitism was such an issue. I'd never been verbally attacked like that prior. I mean, obviously my friends made jokes, but it didn't really affect me that much until this incident.
I rolled a paper up like a scroll like 2 weeks before my bar mitzvah. You're a racist to Jewish people.
You?
I was like, I'm Jewish. She's like, you're a racist to yourself. Being in 7th grade, like, that's so ass backwards. Like, you're trying to care, but you're missing the point.
People talk about Jews being cheap and Jews negotiating hard, and that's anti-Semitic. And you know where this all came from? Back in the times that the Romans became Christians, they weren't allowed to lend money. And so they brought Jewish merchants along with them as they conquered lands, and the Jewish merchants were brought along to be their money lenders. And eventually the Jewish merchants became Shylock and became the dirty Jews and the cheap Jews and the penny-pinching Jews.
The Holocaust.
The Holocaust.
The Holocaust.
Well, the Germans left wiping out 2/3 of all the Jews of Europe, at least. Probably more than that. I think it was probably more like 80%. I think maybe 1 out of 5 Jews survived. But did anti-Semitism end at that point? Those people didn't change their views of Jews just because the war ended. They took Jewish property, and they were very scared that the Jews were going to come back and take their property back. So they were, you know, I know of many stories of Jews who returned to their towns after the war was over and were killed by people that had taken their properties.
What it should have been was an example that should have been set for people to understand how far hate could go. And I think it should have lessened the hate that is being spread across the whole world, not just America.
We have a whole section of Holocaust denial, and in the aftermath of the Holocaust, the Jewish state was created, Israel, and there's been a lot of anti-Semitism directed through that.
When they went to these other places, what happened? They reoccupied land in Israel that had been traditionally their land. And there were a whole lot of Arab people that weren't so happy, and that created a whole new wave of anti-Semitism that had always been there, but now had been magnified because of the creation of the State of Israel, and now became organized anti-Semitism.
There's so many people out there that just don't want to look at the bigger picture, which is that after something so tragic happens, we should be looking at it and seeing how we can grow from it and become better people.
I don't feel as though a tragic event, a Holocaust, a diaspora makes anti-Semitism go away. I think it strengthens it, right? When you have violence, people are inspired by violence. And I think, if anything, the Holocaust was the platform for anti-Semitism.
What do you think that our government should be doing differently?
What do you think they should be doing differently?
What do you think they should be doing differently?
I think that perhaps the intent is to help, but the message is blurred amidst a wave of white nationalism that has grown in this country.
I think that after something like what happened in Pittsburgh, we need to think about what we're doing and what we're not doing to protect Jewish people. And I think that a lot of people want to say, okay, well, you need more security, more guns to protect yourselves, but I don't think that's necessarily the answer.
The federal government itself hasn't done anything. It's a bit more thoughts and prayers, and there are a lot of Jewish people within my community that feel as though this is hatred, plain and simple, and it doesn't have anything to do with gun violence, but it does. And anti-Semitism has a lot to do with politics. And I mean, I personally feel as though, a week went by, and right before the shooting, we had someone try to bomb politicians and celebrities. Then we had, a week after the shooting, we had another shooting in Thousand Oaks at a bar.
It's not helpful to say to people that were just shocked by a tremendous tragedy in Pittsburgh to tell them that, well, if they had had an armed security guard, the tragedy would have been averted. What's the answer then? Do you have to have people with guns everywhere?
I think that what we're doing obviously isn't working, because since Pittsburgh there have been many other attacks.
I've seen arguments such as armed teachers, armed rabbis, that's completely nonsensical, but people want gun control. There needs to be more steps that someone has to take before they can simply purchase and own a firearm such as the one used in the Pittsburgh shooting.
An important tenet of the country that I think we love is that we accept our neighbors, and our neighbors are not our enemies.